Hello and welcome to a brief introduction to single subject research. My name is Eleanor Maddock and I might meet some of you in class. Single subject research is a type of experimental research. It is not correlational or descriptive. When done correctly, it is rigorous quantitative research. And it is described as establishing a functional relationship. Functional relations, that's an applied behavioral analysis term, and it means basically the same thing as causal inference. They're not exactly the same, but they can be interpreted generally to mean the same thing. Functionality is the same as causality. Single subject research, again, when it's done correctly, has strong internal validity. And validity is a very large and important concept in statistics, which you will learn more about as the course progresses. The internal validity is established by controlling the dependent variable, that's the outcome variable, by manipulating the independent variable. So an independent variable could be something like the lighting in the room, or background noise, or playing music or not playing music, and you establish a functional relation by changing the behavior of a student in the classroom, either calming them down or getting them excited. So that would be the dependent variable, the behavior, and the independent variable would be the surrounding environment. The subject serves as their own control. They are not compared to other students or other people, and not even in other classrooms. They're only compared to themselves within that setting. Single subject research is most commonly performed in order to identify effective interventions in natural settings. It can be performed in a lab setting, but that's not very common. One of the great advantages to single subject research is that it is a feasible and efficient way to conduct research in the field. The field typically being the classroom or a counseling center or an outpatient facility. While the name is single subject, that's a little bit misleading. It doesn't have to be a single person. You can have up to 8 participants in single subject research. You can even have a whole class. That class is then described as a single unit, however, one subject. So don't get hung up on the word single. You can have multiple subjects in single subject research. That's just the name for this type of research. Oh, sorry, I forgot that effective interventions refers to clinical significance, not statistical significance. And by clinical significance, we are referring to a meaningful change in performance or quality of life, regardless of what statistical analysis says. So if something feels better for a student, enough that they notice it and comment on it, or that the teacher notices and comments on it, that could be clinically significant, even if it does not reach a level of statistical significance. There are 3 big common questions in single subject research. The first and simplest being, does this intervention change behavior? More specifically, does it reduce or increase a target behavior? So, for example, a student with Tourette's might have a problem emitting a certain sound during class, and that can be embarrassing for the student and disruptive to the whole instructional process. So you might try different interventions to see if you can reduce their emissions. The next question would be if you want to compare interventions. You've got one that you know works, but it doesn't work well enough. You'd like to see something work even better. So you want to compare 2 interventions. You can do that with single subject research. Which intervention is more effective? And then the third one is very interesting and used quite a bit in clinical settings, outpatient settings, juvenile justice settings. And this would be, is this intervention more or less effective when combined with X? People in the school counseling program will come across a lot of these studies which look at cognitive behavioral therapy, chemical therapy, and talk therapy, and different combinations of those three things. That can be investigated using single subject research, combining those three different elements and using them individually and comparing student responses or client responses during those different types of sessions. Single subject research is, again, rigorous, so there is a structure to it. It's not a narrative, and it should not be confused with case studies or program descriptions. You will hear case studies identified as single case design or single case study. The use of the word single there can confuse you and think that it's talking about single subject research, and it's not. They're very different. Case studies tend to be, not exclusively, but they tend to be more qualitative in nature or mixed methods. Single subject, again, is a rigorous quantitative method. Some of the basic vocabulary that you're going to need refers to phase design. We'll see that in a minute. How data analysis is conducted, and data collection techniques. The data collection techniques we'll leave for in-class, as that can get fairly sophisticated. Data analysis, however, in single subject research is primarily conducted visually. Simply put, a phase is a period of time where things don't change. So you establish a consistent environment or setting. This would be the independent variable and the dependent variable. So for example, a classroom at 10 a.m. with the lights on and the windows closed. As soon as you change one of those aspects of the classroom, you have now gone into a different phase. The baseline phase is treatment as usual, or how things are right now, but what's already happening in the classroom before you change anything. So how things are that are in some way disappointing or unsatisfactory that you feel the need to introduce an intervention. The intervention phase is exactly what it sounds like. It's the treatment phase. So you turn the lights off to see if that alters the behavior. You are now in an intervention phase. So the period of time during which data is collected on an occurrence of a behavior in the midst of a change in conditions, that can be introducing a treatment or intervention, like turning the lights off, a change in treatment intensity. So if you've already established a reward system with a student, you can be phasing it out or ramping it up to see if that alters the behavior. Change in behavioral expectations, we call that changing the criterion. So initially, maybe you require the student to reduce their outbursts to 1 every 2 minutes. And as they meet that expectation, you raise the standards and you say, okay, you now want to aim for 1 every 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Anytime you initiate any change like that, either in the treatment itself or in the behavior that you're measuring, you are in an intervention phase. So here we have an AB-AB phase, or sorry, AB-AB design. The A refers to the baseline. You always start with a baseline. The only time you wouldn't start with a baseline actually is if safety is an issue. Those are extreme and unusual circumstances, however. If there's a major ethical concern, you might move right into an intervention phase if you haven't had a chance to collect baseline data. But generally, again, if you're going to be conducting research, you know ahead of time that you've got a few days to collect your baseline data. Each letter identifies the context or the environment for that phase. So the fact that the A is repeated in the first and third phases tells you that the conditions are the exact same during those two phases. Same thing for B. Those are your intervention phases, and it's the same intervention. If it were a different intervention, you'd have to give it a different letter name. Sorry about the pause there. You need to establish reliability of data. So within each phase, the gold standard is to have at least 5 data points. More is even better, but 5 is definitely enough to document a pattern, and 5 is accepted as a good number of data points. An interesting point, the What Works Clearinghouse, which is an education research resource, years back they identified 3 data points as being sufficient for baseline data, and they've increased the rigor of their standards, so now you have to have at least 5. Anecdotally, I can say that 5 is definitely better than 3. 3 may have met the minimum requirements in the past, but 5 data points is definitely much better. And as a general rule, you want to have 5 data points or more for each phase. So baseline data, 5 points. You introduce an intervention, you need 5 more data points within that phase. Again, more is better, but 5 is enough. If you go back to baseline, or if you move to another version of the intervention, or a combination or a different intensity of the intervention, you have changed phases, and again, you need 5 more data points for every single phase. Again, you saw earlier an AB design. There were 3 phase changes. Those were marked by the dotted lines. So the dotted lines show you a change in phase over the 4 phases. And note that there should be 5 data points per phase, but in each of the A phases, there are only 4 data points. In this case, it might be because of the spikes. The 4th data point in each of those baseline phases shows an increasing trend, and so there may have been ethical concerns about a student injuring themselves or being overly disruptive to other students, so maybe it was decided that 4 data points was enough. Also notice that during the 2 intervention phases, there's a big difference in the average score between the intervention and the baseline phases. We're going to look at a couple of examples now using visual analysis techniques that are long established and trusted within the world of behavioral research. The vocabulary that you need here includes level, trend, and variability. Those are the 3 most important concepts in visual analysis. More sophisticated analysis will include immediacy, overlap, and consistency. Level simply means the horizontal average. So within each phase, so we've got our first phase here to the left of the first dotted line. Although the data moves up and down a little bit, generally you can see a horizontal average at about 3.5, 3 or 4, somewhere in there. Then in that middle phase, Again, you see a horizontal average at about 10 or 11, and in the last phase, around 9 or 10. So level refers to a horizontal average. Trend, on the other hand, refers to increasing or decreasing. So the first phase here to the left of the first phase change line, there is no level. That's because there is definitely an increasing trend. If you look at the middle phase, however, it's hard to say whether there's an overall up or down trend there. So I would say that there's a level, a horizontal level of about 10. And of course, you want to identify 10 what? 10 emissions per minute, 10 restraints per day, whatever your unit of measurement is. And in the third column there, the third phase, you have a decreasing trend. Variability is a little bit easier to recognize visually. You can think of it as the amount of bounce in a line, how far apart each point is between those consecutive points. So it's how much the line fluctuates or how stable the data is. There's a lot of variability in this baseline phase. There's also an increasing trend. So even though the points go up and down and up and down and up and down, they in general move upward. So there's high variability here and an increasing trend. The intervention phase to the right, there is some variability, but not nearly as much, and there is still an increasing trend. So the how of single subject research. We've looked very quickly at how to analyze the data, but how is it conducted? How is that data collected? First, you have to establish the baseline. Before you can see whether an intervention has been effective in changing the behavior, you have to know where you're starting. You have to know the status of behaviors right now. So you establish a baseline and you collect at least 5 data points. Typically that would be over 5 days, but certainly it can be done. I've seen single subject research where there are 5 data points collected within 1 day and then 5 intervention points collected the next day. That's a different type of single subject research, but it can be done. When you introduce a treatment or an intervention, you need 5 more data points, and you do this over and over and over. There's a very good reason for this, which we will get to in class, but the key to single subject research is repetition. So again, baseline data, you need at least 5 points. Treatment data, you need at least 5 points. Then you're going to go back and you're going to look at baseline again. Then you're going to go back and repeat the treatment phase again. You graph this data. You include dashed vertical lines to indicate phase changes. And then you analyze the graph for level, trend, and variability. There are several types of designs within single subject. The 2 most common are by far reversal, which is also known as withdrawal, and multiple baseline. Reversal withdrawal includes ABAB, ABCBC. Again, we will look at examples in class. You see reference to that on the slide here. It will make more sense when we have a chance to go over it in class. But anytime you are changing the intervention several times, or you're introducing it and then taking it away, that's going to be a reversal withdrawal design. Multiple baseline is appropriate when something cannot be unlearned, for example. So you teach a student how to tie their shoe. Before they knew how to tie their shoe was baseline. Teaching them how to tie their shoe is the intervention, and then you want to see how many times they can accurately tie their shoe after the lesson. That would be the intervention data. Hopefully they're not going to forget or unlearn that behavior. So it's not possible to go back to the baseline phase. When that happens, we instead use a multiple baseline approach. So we might have 6 students and we teach them the skill at different points. So maybe we teach the first student on Monday, the second student on Wednesday, the third student on Friday, and then the fourth and fifth students on Tuesday and Thursday of the following week. That allows us to compare baseline conditions across the 6 students and compare intervention data across the 6 students. So it kind of creates reversal withdrawal, but instead of within student, you're looking at reversal withdrawal across several students. But you are still looking at only one behavior and only one intervention. The intervention was teaching how to tie the shoe, and the behavior was tying the shoe correctly. So if you've got multiple people like that and you're staggering when you give the lesson or you provide the intervention, that would be a multiple baseline. Changing criterion is when you use the same treatment but with changing intensity or different delivery methods. A medical example would be providing medication orally or by injection. Same treatment with changing intensity of expectations would also be changing criterion. These are more sophisticated approaches to single subject, which we will probably not get to given that this is a survey course. Same thing with multiple treatments. If you want to look to your textbook or research online, you can look at examples of changing criterion and multiple treatments. For our purposes, though, we're just going to look at those first 2 types, reversal withdrawal and multiple baseline. So a multiple treatment reversal, again, this is just a sophisticated reversal withdrawal. The A phases, the first and third phases, hopefully you recognize those as baseline. The B phase, between interval 9 and 15, an intervention has been introduced, and we see that the behavior, SIB, that's self-injurious behavior, the incidence of self-injurious behavior per minute has decreased. Notice that it didn't decrease immediately, but it does decrease. If you look to intervals 21 through 25, that is identified as a C phase. So this is still an intervention, but it is not the exact same as the B phase. Because we don't have any more information, we just have the graph, we know that C is different from B, but we don't know how. It could be a different intensity, it could be a different treatment altogether, it could be a different combination of treatments. But in short, it's important to remember that A, B, and C, they refer to different environmental conditions or different versions of the intervention. Also notice that the 2 A phases are 2 baseline phases. The data is similar. Same with the 2 C phases. If you look at the first and the second C phases, the data is consistent across those 2 phases. The B phases, the first intervention, we have 3 B phases, and that data shows a trend. It's a decreasing trend. There's some variability, but very little. That would be, if I knew nothing about this study or what was happening, the B phase is the one that I would want to know more about. What's going on in the B phase that data is so very different from baseline? And then what was with that very first B point in interval 9, that the data is the same as baseline, and then there's a big sudden drop off. And then by the end, in the end of the study for intervals 38 through 42, the self-injurious behavior is down to 0 on 3 of those points. That would be very interesting to me, and I would want to know what was going on during those B phases. What was the intervention being implemented at that point? So, in summary, single subject research. It is experimental and it establishes causality. We will explore exactly how that is done in class, because that's a fairly lengthy discussion. Why is it performed? To identify or compare treatment efficacy. As well, it's feasible, easy to perform. It can be done in the classroom. You don't need to bring in experts from the local university, although that's always nice. You don't have to pay physicians to come in. You don't have to remove the student from the classroom. It can be done right there. The only thing you need is time. You do need enough time to collect all of your data points. And how is it done? Again, we'll look at this more in class, but what you need to remember is replication, replication, replication. Phases, you have baseline phases and intervention phases. Predict, verify, replicate. That is, those are the three key terms of baseline logic. Again, something we will get to in class. Data collection, we will explore more in class. How do you select appropriate measurement? The thing IOA, you will hear that a lot in your statistics and measurement courses. And what is IOA? What does it mean? The long version is inter-observer agreement. We will discuss that in class as well. What you should be able to do, though, is a little bit of visual analysis. Specifically, we looked at level, trend, and variability. In class, we will look at immediacy, overlap, some of those other things. How you conduct single subject research will determine whether there is strong internal validity or not. Again, single subject research should be a rigorous experimental design. It is not the same as a program description or a case study, which we'll use just before and after data. The replication, replication, replication establishes causality. So that leads to the question, can these results be generalized to other people? Well, that has to do with the replication, replication, replication. And as it sounds, single subject research does generally refer to the people that you investigated using that one intervention in that one setting, in that one context. So if it's so specific, why do we use single subject research at all? That's a great discussion, and single subject research is a very important part of the evidence-based discussion. So we'll talk about that more in class, but again, I'll give you a hint: replication, replication, replication. I'd like you to have this in your notes: baseline logic, prediction, verification, replication. It's not going to make much sense to you right now, but if you can have that in your notes now, that will save us a little bit of time in class, and I can explain to you what prediction, verification, and replication mean, how they establish validity and reliability. Thanks. See you in class.